In 359 years before Christ, a 23-year-old prince seized a throne surrounded by enemies, his brother freshly dead, pretenders circling like wolves, and Illyrian warriors occupying his western lands. Within 2 decades, he would forge the most lethal army the ancient world had ever seen. His son would use it to shatter the largest empire on earth before dying at 32 in a palace that was not his own. The prince was Philip, the son was Alexander, and the kingdom they transformed from a backwater of tribal warlords into a world-conquering machine was Macedon. This is the complete story, not a fragment, not a summary. The full arc of a civilization that began in the mountain valleys north of Olympus, where argid kings claimed the blood of Heracles and struggled for centuries merely to survive. It follows the revolutionary military reforms that turned shepherds and horsemen into the phalanx that broke Greece at Chaeronea. It marches with Alexander across the Hellespont, through the fires of Persepolis, over the Hindu Kush, to the monsoon rivers of India, and back through the killing sands of Gedrosia. It watches an empire tear itself apart in the hands of rival generals, and it traces what rose from the wreckage, a Hellenistic world stretching from Sicily to Afghanistan that endured 3 centuries and shaped everything that followed. This story still matters because the world Alexander left behind never fully disappeared. The Greek language he spread became the tongue of philosophy, science, and scripture. The cities he founded still bear inhabitants. The very idea that one political vision might unite diverse peoples under a single rule passed through his legacy into Rome, into Islam, into the modern imagination of empire itself. If you find meaning in following the complete rise and fall of the forces that shaped our world, subscribe. Each week, we walk the full lifespan of a civilization from its first breath to its lasting echo. Let us begin where all of this began, with the land itself. The snow line on Mount Olympus descends in winter until it touches the tree line, and below that line, where oak forests give way to river valleys thick with sediment, a kingdom takes shape in the centuries before classical Greece reaches its golden age. This is Macedonia, not a single unified plain, but a fractured geography of highland cantons and coastal lowlands, divided by the Axios River and its tributaries, hemmed in by mountain ranges that separate it from Thessaly to the south, Illyria to the west, and Thrace to the east. The lowland core stretches from the Thamaic Gulf inland, a broad alluvial plain rich in grain and cattle. But the highlands, Orestis, Lyncestis, Elimiotis, Tymphaea, are another world entirely, ruled by tribal chiefs who owe only nominal allegiance to any lowland king. Sometime around 700 years before the Common Era, a dynasty emerges at the center of this fragmented landscape. The Argids claim descent from Temenus of Argos, himself a descendant of Heracles, and through that lineage they assert kinship with the great royal houses of the Peloponnese. Whether this genealogy reflects genuine migration from southern Greece, or a later fabrication designed to secure legitimacy among skeptical Hellenes, remains uncertain. What matters is the political function of the claim. It positions the Macedonian kings as Greek, however marginally, in a world where the boundary between Greek and barbarian carries enormous cultural weight. The early Argead kings rule from Aigai, a settlement nestled against the foothills where the Haliakmon River curves northward. Their palace overlooks a theatre and a necropolis where royal burials accumulate across generations. The kingdom they govern is small, vulnerable, and surrounded by hostile peoples. Illyrian raiders descend from the western mountains. Thracian tribes press from the east. The highland cantons resist centralized control, their chiefs commanding warrior retinues loyal to kinship rather than crown. By the early 5th century before the Common Era, the Argead king Alexander I navigates the most dangerous crisis yet, the Persian invasion of Greece. When Xerxes marches his army through Macedonia in 480, Alexander submits, providing earth and water as tokens of vassalage. He has no choice. His kingdom lies directly in the path of the largest military force the ancient world has assembled. Yet he simultaneously sends secret warnings to the Greek allies before the Battle of Plataea in 479, earning later the epithet Philhellene, friend of Greeks. He competes at the Olympic Games, where his Greek ancestry is challenged and ultimately accepted by the judges. This dual identity, barbarian to southern Greeks, Greek to his own people, defines Macedonia's position for generations. After Alexander I, the kingdom endures decades of instability. But in 413, Archelaus seizes the throne and initiates transformations that foreshadow what Philip II will later complete. He moves the royal seat from Aigai to Pella, a site with better access to the sea and to trade routes running east toward Thrace. He builds roads connecting the highland cantons to the lowland core, improving military mobilization. He invites Greek artists and intellectuals to his court, most famously the playwright Euripides, who composes his final works, including the Bacchae, in Macedonia before his death there around 406. Archelaus fortifies strong points, reorganizes the cavalry, and begins to project Macedonian power beyond its traditional borders. His assassination in 399 opens 4 decades of catastrophe. Between that year and 359, 6 kings occupy the throne. Most die violently. Pretenders multiply. The highland chiefs reassert independence. Illyrians inflict devastating defeats, killing King Perdiccas III, along with 4,000 Macedonian soldiers in 359. The kingdom stands on the edge of dissolution, its army shattered, its borders collapsing inward. Into this chaos steps a young prince who has spent years as a hostage in Thebes, observing the military innovations of Epaminondas. His name is Philip, and he is 23 years old. The kingdom he inherits is broken. What he will build from its ruins will reshape the entire ancient world. Philip moves fast. In his first months on the throne, he buys time through diplomacy, paying off the Paeonians to the north, negotiating the withdrawal of one pretender's Athenian backers, eliminating another rival through assassination. But these are temporary measures. The real transformation begins in the training grounds outside Pella, where Philip reshapes the Macedonian infantry into something the Greek world has never seen. The weapon is the sarissa, a cornel-wood pike stretching nearly 18 feet from iron point to bronze counterweight. A man cannot wield it with one hand. It requires both arms extended, the shaft balanced at a point roughly 10 feet from the tip, the rear spike planted or angled depending on rank within the formation. When the first 5 rows lower their sarissas simultaneously, the front presents a hedgehog of iron points that no cavalry charge can penetrate, no hoplite shield wall can reach past. The men behind hold their pikes angled upward, deflecting arrows, creating a forest of wood and metal that moves as a single organism across the field. Philip drills them relentlessly. He marches them 30 miles in a day carrying their own equipment. He eliminates most of the baggage train, allowing only one servant for every 10 soldiers. He forbids carts entirely during summer campaigns. The result is an army that moves faster than any Greek force, arriving before enemies expect it, deploying before they can react. The infantry phalanx becomes the anvil. The hammer is the companion cavalry, Macedonian nobles mounted on war horses, armed with the Ziston lance, trained to strike at oblique angles into an enemy's exposed flank once the phalanx has pinned them in place. By 357 before the Common Era, Philip turns this instrument against Amphipolis, the wealthy city controlling the Strymon River crossing and access to the gold and silver mines of Mount Pangaion beyond. The city falls. Within a year, Philip controls the mines themselves, extracting over 1,000 talents of gold and silver annually, a revenue stream that dwarfs what any Greek city-state commands. He uses it to maintain a permanent professional army, to bribe politicians in Athens and Thebes, to hire mercenaries, and to finance siege engineers who develop torsion catapults capable of breaching fortification walls. The conquests accelerate. Thessaly falls under Macedonian control by 352 after Philip defeats the Phocians at the Battle of the Crocus Field, earning him command of Thessaly's superb cavalry. The Chalcidice resists longer. Olynthus, the leading city of the Chalcidian League, appeals to Athens for help. Athens sends too little, too late. In 348, Philip besieges Olynthus, takes it through treachery from within, and destroys it utterly, its population sold into slavery, its buildings leveled to foundations. The message reverberates across Greece. Demosthenes thunders in the Athenian assembly, warning that Philip is no ordinary barbarian king, but a systematic conqueror who will not stop until all Greece lies under his heel. Yet Athens cannot match Philip's resources or his speed. When war finally comes in 338, Philip meets the combined forces of Athens and Thebes on the plain of Chaeronea in Boeotia. The battle unfolds in August. Philip commands the right wing personally, executing a feigned withdrawal that draws the Athenian hoplites forward and opens a gap in the Allied line. Into that gap charges the companion cavalry of the left wing, led by his 18-year-old son Alexander. The Theban sacred band, 300 elite warriors who have never broken in battle, stands its ground and dies where it stands. A stone lion marks their grave today. Chaeronea shatters Greek independence. Philip does not destroy Athens, he needs its fleet, but he garrisons Thebes and establishes the League of Corinth in 337, binding every major Greek state except Sparta into an alliance under Macedonian command. The declared purpose is war against Persia, vengeance for Xerxes' invasion a century and a half earlier. An advance force of 10,000 crosses into Asia Minor under generals Parmenion and Attalus. Philip prepares to follow with the main army. The peripheral kingdom has become the master of Greece, and its king now looks east toward the wealthiest empire on earth. But Philip never crosses into Asia himself. In the autumn of 336 before the Common Era, at the ancient capital of Aigai, the king attends the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra to Alexander of Epirus. The theatre is packed with dignitaries from across the Greek world. Philip enters without bodyguards, a deliberate display of confidence and accessibility. A young man named Pausanias, one of the royal bodyguards, steps forward and drives a Celtic blade between the king's ribs. Philip collapses on the flagstones. Pausanias sprints toward waiting horses, but catches his foot in a vine and is killed by pursuing companions before he can speak his motives to anyone who records them. The prince who inherits this crisis is 20 years old. Alexander III has been prepared for kingship since birth, born in July of 356, the same summer his father captured Potidæa, and his mother Olympias claimed the child was sired by Zeus in the form of a thunderbolt. At 12, the boy tamed a massive black stallion named Bucephalus that no groom could mount, turning the horse to face the sun so its own shadow would not frighten it. Philip, watching, reportedly wept with pride. From 343 to 340, the philosopher Aristotle tutored Alexander and a circle of noble youths at the gardens of Mieza, a limestone nymphaeum shaded by plane trees near Naousa. There the prince absorbed Homer, Herodotus, medicine, geometry, and the classification of the natural world. At 16, Philip left him as regent of Macedon while campaigning in Thrace, and Alexander crushed a Median revolt and founded his first city. At 18, he commanded the Campanian cavalry at Chaeronea and shattered the Theban sacred band. Now, with Philip dead, Alexander moves with terrifying speed. Rivals and potential claimants disappear within weeks. His cousin Amyntas is executed. Attalus, the uncle of Philip's newest wife, is assassinated in Asia Minor on Alexander's orders. The infant child of that marriage perishes. Olympias ensures no competing bloodline survives. By the spring of 335, Alexander marches north against Thracian and Illyrian tribes who test the new king's resolve. He crosses the Danube on improvised rafts, scattering the Getae, then wheels west to defeat the Illyrian king Clytus near modern Korcha. While he campaigns in the north, a rumor reaches Thebes that Alexander is dead. The city revolts, besieging the Macedonian garrison on the Cadmea. Alexander force marches south, 300 kilometers in 13 days, and appears before Theban walls before the city can organize allies. The assault is brief and catastrophic. In October of 335, Thebes falls. Alexander orders the city razed to its foundations. 6,000 Thebans die in the fighting. 30,000 are sold into slavery. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar are spared. The message reverberates across Greece. Rebellion against Macedon means annihilation. Athens sends envoys begging forgiveness. Sparta remains silent and isolated. No Greek state will challenge Alexander again while he lives. Through the winter of 335 to 34, preparations accelerate at Pella. The army assembles approximately 32,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, supplemented by allied Greek contingents and specialists. Engineers, surveyors, scientists, and historians join the column. Alexander appoints Antipater as regent of Macedon with 12,000 troops to hold Greece. The treasury is nearly empty. Philip's wars consumed his gold. Alexander reportedly distributes his remaining royal estates among companions, keeping nothing for himself but hope. In the spring of 334, the army crosses the Hellespont at the Narrows near Sestos and Abydos. Alexander himself steers the lead trireme, sacrificing a bull to Poseidon mid-channel and pouring libations from a golden cup. He is the first to leap ashore on Asian soil, hurling his spear into the beach, claiming the continent as territory won by the spear. He then rides south to Troy, where he sacrifices at the tomb attributed to Achilles, exchanges his armor for antique weapons said to date from the Trojan War, and runs naked around the burial mound as Achilles' companion Patroclus once did. The symbolism is unmistakable. This is not merely a military expedition. It is a mythic enterprise led by a young king who believes himself descended from gods and heroes, carrying a copy of the Iliad annotated by Aristotle in a jeweled casket. 37,000 men follow him east into the Persian Empire. None of them know that most will never return home. The Granicus River runs shallow in late spring, its bed of smooth stones visible beneath the current where it cuts through the rolling farmland of the Troad. Along its eastern bank, in May of 334 before the Common Era, the cavalry of the Persian satraps waits in formation on the high ground. Perhaps 6,000 horsemen arrayed along the bluff, with Greek mercenary infantry held in reserve behind them. The satraps of Lydia, Phrygia, and Cappadocia have gathered their forces here not merely to contest a river crossing, but to kill Alexander personally. Their strategy is simple. Hold the riverbank, let the Macedonians flounder in the water and mud, and cut down the young king before his invasion gains momentum. Alexander ignores the counsel of Parmenion, who urges a dawn crossing. Instead, in the late afternoon light, he leads the companion cavalry from the right wing directly into the river. The horses struggle against the current, hooves slipping on wet stone, climbing toward a bank defended by javelin and lance. The fighting at the waterline is brutal and close. Alexander is conspicuous. His white-plumed helmet draws every Persian rider towards him. A satrap's sword splits his helmet. Another cavalryman raises a blade behind him. Clytus the Black severs the man's arm before the blow lands. The companions push up the bank, and once Macedonian heavy cavalry gains level ground, the Persian horsemen cannot hold. The line breaks. The satraps scatter or die. Several fall in the melee itself. Alexander then turns on the Greek mercenaries who served Persia, surrounding them and slaughtering most, sending 2,000 survivors in chains to forced labor in Macedon. The message is deliberate. Greeks who fight for Persia are traitors, not soldiers. The victory at the Granicus opens Western Asia Minor. City after city along the Ionian coast welcomes Alexander as liberator. Sardis surrenders without a fight, its Persian garrison commander handing over the citadel and treasury. Ephesus opens its gates. Democratic factions in these cities overthrow their Persian-backed oligarchies, and Alexander restores popular governments, a political gesture aimed at legitimizing Macedonian hegemony as liberation rather than conquest. But Halicarnassus resists. The great port city of Caria, fortified by Memnon of Rhodes, the most capable Persian commander, holds through autumn of 334. Alexander's siege engines batter the walls while Memnon launches counterattacks from the harbor, supplied by the Persian fleet. Eventually the outer city falls, but Memnon withdraws the garrison by sea to offshore islands, denying Alexander a clean victory. Through the winter, Alexander marches along the Lycian and Pamphylian coasts, securing ports to neutralize Persian naval superiority without fighting a sea battle. By spring of 333, he turns inland to Gordium in Phrygia, where the army reunites with reinforcements from Macedon. Here stands the ancient wagon of Midas, its yoke bound to a pole by a knot of cornel bark so complex no end is visible. Tradition holds that whoever looses it will rule all Asia. Alexander resolves the puzzle. Whether by cutting or pulling the pin that holds yoke to pole, the sources disagree, but the propaganda value is immediate and immense. Summer brings the march southeast through the Cilician Gates, a narrow pass through the Taurus Mountains where a handful of defenders could stop an army. The Persians fail to hold it. Alexander descends into the coastal plain of Cilicia, falls briefly ill at Tarsus, then pushes south. Darius III, commanding the full imperial levy, perhaps 100,000 men, moves north through the Achaemenid gates and emerges behind Alexander, cutting his supply line. The two armies meet on the narrow plain at Issus in November of 333, hemmed between mountains and sea. The confined space neutralizes Persian numerical superiority. Alexander leads the companion cavalry in a charge directly at Darius's position. The Persian center holds briefly, but when Alexander's wedge drives close enough that Darius can see the spear points, the great king turns his chariot and flees. The Persian left collapses. Tens of thousands die in the rout. In Darius's abandoned tent, Alexander finds the royal family, mother, wife, daughters, along with treasures beyond any Macedonian's imagination. The Persian Empire's western half lies open. Darius has fled eastward beyond the Euphrates, his army shattered, his family captive. The logical next move, the move any commander hungry for a decisive end might make, is immediate pursuit. But Alexander does not pursue. He turns south instead, toward the Phoenician coast, and the reason is strategic clarity of the highest order. The Persian fleet still dominates the eastern Mediterranean. So long as Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos remain loyal to Darius, that fleet can strike at Greece, sever Alexander's supply lines, and undo everything won at Issus. The empire cannot be conquered from the front alone. Its naval spine must be broken first. Sidon and Byblos submit without resistance in the winter of 333. Their harbors open to Macedonian ships. But Tyre refuses. The ancient city sits on an island half a mile offshore, ringed by walls rising 150 feet from the waterline, supplied by its own harbors facing south and north. Its people have withstood Nebuchadnezzar's 13-year siege a century and a half earlier. They believe the sea itself is their wall. Alexander begins the siege in January of 332. His engineers construct a causeway, a mole of stone, timber, and rubble, extending from the mainland toward the island across water that deepens to nearly 20 feet. Progress is agonizing. Tyrian warships sally from their harbors to harass workers. Fire ships loaded with pitch and sulfur are launched against the mole's wooden towers. Alexander responds by assembling a fleet from submitted Phoenician cities and from Cyprus, nearly 200 warships that eventually blockade both Tyrian harbors. The causeway inches forward through spring and summer. Siege engines are mounted on ships lashed together, battering the southern wall from the sea. In August of 332, after 7 months, a breach opens. Macedonian infantry pours through. The slaughter is immense. 8,000 Tyrians killed, 30,000 sold into slavery. The island fortress that defied Babylon falls to a king who simply refused to leave the sea unconquered behind him. 2 months later, Gaza resists. Its governor Bartis commands a garrison atop a high tell surrounded by deep sand that renders siege engines nearly useless. Alexander orders a massive earthwork ramp constructed around the entire mound. After 2 months of brutal fighting and 3 wounds to Alexander himself, Gaza falls in October. The road to Egypt lies open. Egypt welcomes him. The Persian satrap Mazaces surrenders without battle in November of 332. The Egyptians, who have chafed under Persian rule since Cambyses's conquest in 525, see Alexander not as another foreign master but as a liberator. He sacrifices to Apis at Memphis, respects Egyptian religious customs, and appoints native Egyptians to civil governance while retaining Macedonian military command. In January of 331, Alexander rides west along the Nile's Canopic branch to a fishing village called Rakotis, where a limestone ridge separates the Mediterranean from Lake Mareotis. Here he marks out the grid of a new city, Alexandria, its streets aligned to catch the prevailing northwest wind, its double harbor sheltered by the island of Pharos. The city will become the greatest port of the ancient world. But on this winter morning it is only chalk lines on stone and a king's vision of commerce flowing between Greece and the wealth of the Nile. Then he turns west into the desert. With a small escort, Alexander marches 300 miles across the Libyan sand to the oasis of Siwa, sacred to the Egyptian god Ammon, whom Greeks identify with Zeus. The journey takes 8 days through waterless terrain. Ancient sources record that rain fell miraculously, that crows or serpents guided the party when landmarks vanished in sandstorms. At the temple, the priest of Ammon receives Alexander alone in the inner sanctuary. What is said remains unknown. Alexander reportedly told only that he heard what his heart desired. Later traditions claim the oracle greeted him as son of the god. He never publicly reveals the full content of the exchange, but from this moment forward, the question of his divinity, whether claimed, implied, or genuinely believed, will shadow every remaining year of his reign. He returns to Memphis in early spring, his army rested, Egypt secured, and the road east toward Darius and the heartland of Persia finally clear. The army departs Memphis in the spring of 331 before the Common Era, marching northeast across the Sinai and up through Palestine along roads already secured in the previous year's coastal campaign. Alexander moves with purpose now, not toward another siege, not toward another coastal city, but inland, toward the heartland of the Achaemenid Empire itself. The column crosses the Euphrates at Thapsacus in July, finding the bridges undefended. Darius has not chosen to contest the river crossings. He is gathering his forces further east on ground of his own choosing. The Macedonians turn north along the Euphrates, then swing eastward across the Tigris in September. Scouts report a vast Persian army assembling on a broad plain near the village of Gaugamela, close to the ancient city of Arbela in what is now northern Iraq. Darius has spent months preparing this battlefield, leveling the ground for his scythed chariots, assembling contingents from every corner of his empire. Bactrian cavalry, Indian horsemen, Babylonian infantry, Scythian mounted archers, Persian immortals. Ancient sources estimate his force at perhaps 100,000, though exact numbers remain uncertain. Against them, Alexander brings roughly 47,000. The night before battle, the plain stretches flat and enormous under a lunar eclipse that darkens the sky on September 20th. Alexander sleeps, or so his officers later report, while his generals urge a night attack that he refuses. He wants victory in daylight, visible and undeniable. On the 1st of October, 331 before the Common Era, the armies engage. Darius has anchored his line on superior numbers and width, expecting to envelop the smaller Macedonian force. Alexander's plan is precise and audacious. He advances his right wing obliquely, drawing the Persian left to extend and follow. The companion cavalry rides further right, pulling Bessus and his Bactrian horsemen out of position. A gap opens in the Persian center left. Alexander wheels inward with the companions in a wedge formation and drives directly toward Darius himself. The scythed chariots have already failed. Macedonian light troops opened lanes and struck the horses with javelins. The phalanx holds the center under enormous pressure, its sarissas creating a wall of iron points that no cavalry charge can penetrate. The decisive moment comes when Alexander's wedge punches through. Darius, seeing the companions bearing down, turns his chariot and flees. The Persian center collapses. On the Macedonian left, Parmenion's wing has been under severe pressure. Mazaeus's cavalry has even broken through to threaten the baggage camp, but the rout of the center decides everything. The Persian army disintegrates into flight. The pursuit continues for miles. Darius escapes eastward toward Media. Alexander enters Arbela to find the royal camp abandoned, treasure scattered, the apparatus of empire left behind like shed skin. Within weeks, Babylon opens its gates. The great city surrenders without resistance, its satrap Mazaeus, the same commander who nearly broke Parmenion's wing, offering submission. Alexander enters through the Ishtar Gate, its glazed blue bricks depicting lions and dragons still brilliant in the autumn light. He sacrifices to Marduk, orders the restoration of temples Xerxes had damaged, and confirms local administrators in their posts. The army rests in Babylon for over a month, resupplying amid gardens and canals. Then Susa falls in December, its treasury yielding 40,000 talents of gold and silver, wealth accumulated over 2 centuries of imperial taxation. The column presses on through the winter toward Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Achaemenid power. At the Persian gates, a narrow mountain pass, a satrap named Ariobarzanes blocks the road with a force of perhaps 40,000. Alexander finds a mountain path around the position, guided, sources say, by local prisoners, and strikes the defenders from behind. The pass breaks open. In January of 330 before the Common Era, Alexander enters Persepolis. The Apadana Audience Hall, with its carved reliefs of tribute-bearing nations, the treasury, the palaces of Darius I and Xerxes, all fall into Macedonian hands. The treasury here dwarfs even Susa's. Then, in May, the palaces burn. Whether planned as vengeance for Xerxes' burning of Athens or sparked during a drunken revel, the fire consumes cedar roof beams and collapses carved stone. The symbolic center of Persian kingship is deliberately destroyed. Darius flees eastward through Media toward Bactria, his authority evaporating with each lost province. In July of 330, near modern Shahrud in Iran, his own satrap Bessus and fellow conspirators seize him, stab him, and leave his body in a wagon by the road. Alexander's advance guard finds the corpse. The last Achaemenid king lies dead, murdered not by his conqueror, but by his own men. Alexander drapes the body in his purple cloak and sends it to Persepolis for royal burial. The empire of Cyrus the Great, 2 centuries old, has ended. The road east from Ecbatana leads into a landscape that grows harsher with every passing mile. Behind Alexander lies the conquered heartland of Persia, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, all secured. Ahead stretches a world the Greeks barely know, the vast satrapies of Aria, Drangiana, Arachosia, Bactria, and Sogdiana, territories where the Achaemenid writ ran thin even in the empire's prime. The pursuit of Bessus, the regicide who has declared himself great king under the name Artaxerxes V, draws Alexander into 3 years of the most brutal campaigning his army will ever endure. But first, the rot within. In the autumn of 330 before the Common Era, while the army rests at Frada in Drangiana, informants bring word of a conspiracy. Philotas, son of Parmenion and commander of the companion cavalry, stands accused of knowing about a plot against Alexander's life and failing to report it. The army tries him before the assembled Macedonians. He is found guilty and executed by javelin. Within days, riders gallop west to Ecbatana carrying sealed orders. Parmenion, the old general who served Philip, who commanded the left wing at Gaugamela, who guards the imperial treasury, is killed by his own officers before he can learn of his son's fate. The message is unmistakable. No one, however senior, however loyal, stands beyond suspicion. Alexander presses northeast through the winter snows of the Hindu Kush, crossing passes above 3,000 meters, where men and pack animals collapse from cold and thin air. In the spring of 329, the army descends into Bactria. Bessus retreats across the Oxus River into Sogdiana, but his own followers betray him. Ptolemy's detachment finds the usurper bound naked to a wooden collar at a crossroads. Alexander has his nose and ears cut in Persian fashion before sending him to Ecbatana for trial and execution. Yet Sogdiana refuses to submit. The steppe warriors of this region fight a guerrilla war unlike anything the Macedonians have faced. Sudden raids, burned crops, fortified hilltop refuges, alliances that dissolve and reform overnight. Alexander responds with methodical savagery, dividing his forces into mobile columns, founding garrison cities, and devastating the Polytimetus River valley. It is during this grinding campaign, at a banquet in Maracanda in 328, that wine and rage converge. Clytus the Black, the cavalry commander who saved Alexander's life at the Granicus by severing a Persian sword arm, taunts the king over his adoption of Persian customs, his claim to divine parentage, his dismissal of Philip's legacy. Alexander seizes a spear and drives it through his old companion's chest. The tent falls silent. The king collapses in grief that lasts 3 days. The killing of Clytus exposes what the army already senses. Alexander is changing. He wears the purple and white of Persian royalty. He attempts to introduce proskinesis, the Persian court prostration, among his Macedonian companions, but meets such resistance from men like Callisthenes, Aristotle's nephew, and the expedition's official historian, that the practice is quietly abandoned for Greeks and Macedonians. Callisthenes' defiance costs him. When the royal page's conspiracy is uncovered shortly after, young noble attendants plotting assassination, Callisthenes is implicated, arrested, and dies in captivity, whether by execution or illness the sources dispute. Spring of 327 brings the siege of the Sogdian Rock, a sheer cliffed fortress its defenders boast only winged soldiers could take. Alexander calls for volunteers to climb the rock face at night. 300 men ascend with iron tent pegs and linen ropes. 30 fall to their deaths in darkness. The rest reach the summit by dawn. The garrison, seeing Macedonians above them, surrenders. Among the captives is Roxane, daughter of the Bactrian nobleman Oxyates. Alexander marries her in a ceremony that blends Macedonian and local custom, the shared bread cut by sword. The union is political as much as personal, binding Bactrian aristocracy to the conqueror's house. The eastern marches are not yet pacified, but garrisons hold the major routes. Alexander's gaze turns south toward the Indus and the lands beyond. The army descends from the high plateau of Bactria in the spring of 327 before the Common Era, crossing the Hindu Kush for the second time through passes still choked with late snow. The columns stretch for miles, perhaps 50,000 combat troops, tens of thousands of camp followers, pack animals laden with grain and siege equipment. Below the mountains, the Kabul River Valley opens into warmer air, and the road leads southeast towards the Indus. Alexander divides his force, sending Hephaestion and Perdiccas ahead with the baggage train along the main route through the Khyber, while he takes a smaller column north to subdue the hill tribes of the Swat and Bajor valleys. The fighting is savage. Fortified settlements perch on rocky heights, and their defenders resist with a ferocity unmatched in Persia. At the fortress of Aornos, a sheer-sided plateau rising above the Indus, Alexander conducts a siege that later tradition compares to Heracles' own failed attempt. The garrison falls. By the spring of 326, the reunited army crosses the Indus on a bridge of boats near modern Attic and enters the kingdom of Taxiles, whose ruler submits peacefully, offering elephants, silver, and grain. But beyond Taxiles lies the kingdom of Porus, whose territory stretches east of the Hydaspes River. Porus refuses submission. He assembles his army on the far bank, infantry, cavalry, chariots, and perhaps 200 war elephants, whose smell alone terrifies Macedonian horses. The Hydaspes runs swollen with early monsoon rains in May of 326. Alexander cannot force a direct crossing against elephants. For weeks he feints along the river bank, marching troops upstream and downstream by night, conditioning Porus to ignore movement. Then, on a stormy night, Alexander leads 11,000 men 18 miles upstream to a wooded island crossing. By dawn, they are across. Porus wheels his army to meet them. The battle that follows is the hardest Alexander has fought since Gaugamela. The elephants charge into the phalanx, goring men, lifting them with their trunks. Macedonian infantry learn to slash at the animals' legs and hamstrings, to target the mahouts with javelins. The cavalry envelops Porus's flanks. By afternoon, the Indian army breaks. Porus himself, wounded in the shoulder, is brought before Alexander on his elephant. He is reinstated as a vassal king. His courage has earned respect, and his local knowledge is useful. The army presses east through the Punjab, crossing the Arsacines and the Hydraotes in monsoon flood. Men drown in the crossings. Equipment is lost. The rains do not stop. Then, at the Hyphasis River in July of 326, the army halts. The soldiers refuse to go further. They have marched over 18,000 miles from Macedon. Beyond the Hyphasis, they hear, lies the Ganges and kingdoms fielding armies of hundreds of thousands with 5,000 elephants. The veterans sit in their tents and will not move. Alexander rages, sulks in his tent for 3 days, offers sacrifices. The omens are unfavorable. He yields. Altars are raised to the 12 Olympian gods at the easternmost point of the march, and the army turns back. The return is no peaceful withdrawal. Alexander leads the army south down the Indus by boat and by land, conquering as he goes. At the Mali citadel in early 325, he scales the wall with only 3 companions and leaps inside alone. An arrow pierces his lung. He collapses. His bodyguards hack through the gate and slaughter every living thing within. Alexander survives, barely, carried on a litter for days while the army fears him dead. When he shows himself on a ship's deck, the troops weep. The worst is yet to come. In autumn of 325, Alexander leads the main column west through the Gedrosian Desert, modern Makran in southern Pakistan and Iran. The march is a catastrophe. Water sources are days apart. Sandstorms bury men alive. Flash floods destroy the baggage train at night. Heat kills pack animals by the hundreds. Soldiers drink from stagnant pools and die of dysentery. Ancient sources suggest that of the force entering Gedrosia, perhaps half perish, more than Alexander lost in all his battles combined. The survivors stagger into the satrapy of Carmania skeletal and broken. The empire's edge has been reached, and the cost of reaching it is written in bones bleaching across 600 miles of wasteland. The bones in Gedrosia mark the empire's outer limit, but the empire itself, the living mechanism that holds together lands from the Adriatic to the Indus, is not built on bones alone. It runs on silver, on roads, on administrative continuity, and on the deliberate planting of cities across landscapes that have never known a Greek agora or a Macedonian garrison hall. To understand what Alexander has constructed by the time his surviving columns reassemble in Carmania, in late 325 before the Common Era, one must look not at the battlefield, but at the bureaucratic architecture beneath it. The genius of the system is its refusal to erase what came before. Persian satrapies remain intact across most of the empire. Tax collection follows Achaemenid precedent, tribute assessed in silver darics and paid through provincial treasuries that have operated for 2 centuries. In Babylon, scribes still press cuneiform into clay tablets recording grain stores, canal maintenance, and temple revenues. In Egypt, the ancient system of nomarchs continues to function beneath a Macedonian military governor. Alexander does not impose a single administrative model. He layers Macedonian military authority over existing civilian structures, retaining local elites who cooperate and replacing those who resist. The financial center of this hybrid empire is Babylon itself, where the royal treasury accumulates staggering wealth. The captured treasuries of Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana yielded an estimated 180,000 talents of silver, a sum that dwarfs the annual revenue of every Greek city-state combined. This wealth funds the continuous army, pays mercenary garrisons across 3 continents, and finances the founding of new cities. Harpalus, Alexander's childhood friend, serves as imperial treasurer in Babylon, managing disbursements across the empire until his eventual embezzlement and flight in 324 before the Common Era. The cities are the empire's skeleton. More than 20 settlements bear the name Alexandria, from Alexandria in Egypt, already growing into a major Mediterranean port, to Alexandria Eshate on the Jaxartes River in modern Tajikistan, the northernmost Greek city in the world. Each follows a recognizable pattern, a grid of streets oriented to cardinal directions, an agora for commerce, a gymnasium for Greek cultural life, defensive walls, and a mixed population of Macedonian veterans, Greek mercenaries, and local inhabitants. These are not mere military camps. They are permanent nodes designed to anchor trade routes, project power, and transmit Greek language and customs into territories thousands of miles from the Aegean. The military integration runs deeper still. By 327 before the Common Era, Alexander has ordered 30,000 young Persians trained in Macedonian weapons drill and phalanx tactics, the so-called epigonoi, the successors. Iranian cavalry units ride alongside the companion regiments. Bactrian horse archers serve in the same formations as Thessalian lancers. The army is no longer purely Macedonian. It is an imperial instrument drawing strength from every conquered territory. The culmination of this fusion policy comes at Susa in February of 324 before the Common Era. In a massive pavilion decorated with gold and purple draperies, 90 Macedonian officers take Persian and Median brides in a single ceremony conducted according to Persian rite. Alexander himself marries Statera, daughter of Darius III, and Parysatis, daughter of Artaxerxes III. The weddings are political architecture made flesh, an attempt to create a ruling class that is neither purely Macedonian nor purely Persian, but something new. Coinage circulates this unity in metal. Silver tetradrachms bearing Alexander's image, or rather his features merged with those of Heracles, flow from mints in Babylon, Amphipolis, Tarsus, and Alexandria. They become the common currency of trade from Sicily to the Oxus. A merchant in Bactria and a shipowner in Phoenicia hold the same coin, recognize the same authority. Roads bind the pieces together. The Persian royal road from Sardis to Susa still carries imperial couriers. New routes extend south to the Arabian coast, east through the Bolan Pass toward India. River traffic on the Tigris and Euphrates moves grain and tribute. The empire breathes through these arteries, not as a single centralized state, but as a network of cities, garrisons, treasuries, and roads held together by one man's undefeated reputation and the army that enforces his will across 10,000 miles of conquered earth. But that network, those roads, those coins, those garrisons, depends on the presence of the man at its center. And in the summer of 324 before the Common Era, that man stands before his own army at Opis on the Tigris, and for the first time in his reign, the machine threatens to break apart not from external pressure, but from the rage of those who built it. The crisis erupts when Alexander announces the discharge of 10,000 veterans, Macedonians who have marched with him since the crossing of the Hellespont a decade earlier. He intends it as a reward. They hear it as a dismissal, a replacement by the 30,000 Persian youths now trained in Macedonian drill, armed with sarissas, organized into battalions that mirror the phalanx. The veterans shout that he should discharge them all, that he should campaign with his father Ammon instead. The fury is real. These men have bled at Gaugamela, frozen in the Hindu Kush, nearly drowned crossing the rivers of Punjab. Now they watch Iranian nobles ride beside the companions, wear Macedonian purple, hold command positions that once belonged to men from Pella and Amphipolis. Alexander withdraws to the palace for 3 days. He refuses food, refuses audiences. Then he announces that Persian officers will take over all Macedonian command titles, the companion cavalry, the royal bodyguard, the infantry brigades. The bluff works. The veterans break, weeping, crowding the palace gates, begging reconciliation. What follows is a banquet for 9,000 Macedonians and Persians seated together, pouring libations from the same mixing bowls, while Alexander prays for harmony and partnership in rule. The discharged veterans depart under Craterus's command, carrying their back pay and bonuses, marching west toward Macedon. They will never see their king again. Autumn descends on Ecbatana, where the court has moved to escape the Mesopotamian heat. Hephaestion, Alexander's closest companion since childhood, his second in command, the man who held the rank of Chiliarch governing the empire's daily administration, falls ill with fever. For 7 days, the sickness worsens. On or about the 20th of October, 324 before the Common Era, Hephaestion dies. The grief that follows is not merely personal, but architectural in its scale. Alexander orders the funeral pyre built at Babylon at a cost of 10,000 talents. He commands that the sacred flame in every temple across the empire be extinguished, a gesture traditionally reserved for the death of a king. He sends to the oracle at Siwa, asking whether Hephaestion may be worshipped as a god. The answer returns, as a divine hero. Cities receive orders to establish his cult. For months, Alexander campaigns against the Kosaean hill tribes in the Zagros Mountains, and ancient sources record that he dedicates the slaughter to Hephaestion's memory. The violence is excessive even by the standards of the age. Then, in the spring of 323, the army turns toward Babylon. Chaldean priests meet the column before it reaches the city walls. They warn that omens forbid the king's entry from the west. Alexander hesitates, then enters anyway. The marshlands blocking the eastern approach make the alternative impractical. Babylon receives him with its ancient grandeur, the Ishtar Gate glazed in cobalt and gold, the processional way lined with lions in molded brick, the ziggurat of Etemenanki rising above the palm groves, the palace of Nebuchadnezzar where Alexander establishes his court. Plans consume him. He orders the construction of a harbor at Babylon, large enough for 1,000 warships. Expeditions probe the Arabian coast. Embassies arrive from Carthage, from Italian peoples, perhaps from Iberia. He envisions campaigns south around Arabia, west toward Carthage, and the Pillars of Heracles. The scope is limitless. Then in late May, after a prolonged banquet at the house of a companion named Medius, fever takes hold. Day by day, the heat in his body rises. He continues to give orders, to plan sacrifices, to discuss the Arabian expedition. But by the 7th day he cannot speak. The army, hearing rumors, demands to see him. The doors of the palace open. Rank by rank, file by file, the soldiers pass through the chamber where their king lies silent, eyes tracking each face, one hand raised in faint acknowledgement. On the 10th or 11th of June, 323 before the Common Era, Alexander dies. He is 32 years old. When asked to whom he leaves the empire, the ancient sources record a single whispered word: to the strongest. The body is not yet cold before the arguments begin. In the throne room of the Babylonian palace, the commanders who carried Alexander's empire on their shoulders now turn to face one another, not as brothers in arms, but as rivals. The question is immediate and unanswerable. Who inherits a dominion built entirely around one man's will? Roxane is pregnant, perhaps 6 months along. Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother, lives in the camp, adult male of royal blood, but afflicted with an intellectual disability that renders him unfit to rule alone. Neither candidate can command loyalty the way the dead king did. The infantry, drawn from Macedonian peasant stock, rallies behind Aridaeus as a true Argide. The cavalry officers, the companions, favor waiting for Roxane's child. For days the factions nearly come to blows inside Babylon's walls before a compromise emerges. both shall be kings. Aridaeus reigns as Philip III, and when Roxane's son is born weeks later, the infant becomes Alexander IV. Neither will ever truly rule. The real power settles into the hands of the generals through the partition of Babylon in the summer of 323 before the Common Era. Perdiccas, who received Alexander's signet ring, assumes the regency. Antipater retains Macedonia and Greece. Ptolemy secures Egypt. Antigonus holds much of Anatolia. Lysimachus takes Thrace. Seleucus receives the satrapy of Babylonia. Each man departs to his assigned territory, carrying ambitions far larger than his title suggests. Perdiccas attempts to hold the empire together under his authority, but his position depends on legitimacy no one truly grants him. When Ptolemy diverts Alexander's funeral cortege to Egypt, seizing the body as a talisman of sovereignty, Perdiccas marches south to punish him. The campaign ends in disaster along the Nile in 321 before the Common Era. His own officers, frustrated by failed river crossings and heavy losses, murder him in his tent. The regency collapses. What follows is 2 decades of cascading warfare. Eumenes of Cardia, Alexander's former secretary and one of the few non-Macedonian generals, fights with extraordinary skill to preserve the royal family's authority against Antigonus One-Eye, the most aggressive of the successors. Eumenes wins battles across Iran and Mesopotamia, but is betrayed by his own Silver Shield's veterans in 316 before the Common Era, handed over to Antigonus, and executed. The royal family fares no better. Olympias, Alexander's mother, kills Philip III in 317. Cassander, Antipater's son who has seized Macedonia, executes Olympias in 316 and holds the young Alexander IV prisoner. By 310, Cassander orders the boy and Roxane murdered in secret. The Argead dynasty, which ruled Macedon for nearly 4 centuries, is extinguished entirely. With no legitimate king remaining, the generals openly declare themselves monarchs. Antigonus, controlling the largest territory from Anatolia to Mesopotamia, proclaims himself king in 306. His rivals, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, Cassander, immediately follow. The empire is now formally shattered into competing kingdoms. The final reckoning comes at Ipsus in central Phrygia in 301 before the Common Era. Antigonus, now 80 years old, commands perhaps 70,000 troops. Against him stands a coalition, Seleucus with 500 war elephants acquired from the Mauryan king Chandragupta, Lysimachus with his Thracian veterans. The battle hinges on those elephants. Seleucus deploys them as a living wall that prevents Antigonus's son Demetrius from rejoining the main battle after a cavalry charge carries him too far. Isolated, outnumbered, Antigonus falls beneath a volley of javelins. His death ends any possibility of reunification. The empire Alexander built in 13 years of conquest has taken his generals barely 22 years to devour completely. 4 kingdoms now divide the world he made: Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Asia, Lysimachian Thrace, and Cassander's Macedonia. The age of the successors has become the age of the Hellenistic kings. 4 kingdoms divide the world Alexander made, but it is what grows within them that transforms civilization itself. The year 301 before the Common Era marks not an ending but a beginning, the birth of an age when Greek language, Greek thought, and Greek stone reshape cities from the western Mediterranean to the mountains of Afghanistan. In Egypt, the first Ptolemy consolidates his stolen prize with calculated brilliance. He diverts Alexander's funeral cortege to Memphis, claiming the body as a talisman of legitimacy. Around 295 before the Common Era, his son Ptolemy II completes what his father began, the great library of Alexandria, a repository designed to hold every written work in the known world. Scribes copy scrolls seized from ships entering the harbor. Scholars receive royal stipends to translate, catalogue, and debate. Euclid composes his Elements here, laying the geometric foundations that will endure for 2 millennia. Eratosthenes calculates the circumference of the Earth using shadow angles and the distance between Alexandria and Siena, arriving at a figure remarkably close to the truth. The Pharos lighthouse rises on its island at the harbor mouth, 400 feet of limestone, granite, and fire, visible 30 miles out to sea, guiding merchant vessels carrying grain, papyrus, glass, and linen to every port in the Mediterranean. Across the Sinai and northward, the Seleucid Empire sprawls from the Aegean coast to the Iranian plateau. Antioch on the Orontes becomes its western capital, a city of colonnaded boulevards, public baths, and a royal palace overlooking the river. Seleucia on the Tigris serves the eastern territories, a Greek-speaking metropolis planted beside the ancient ruins of Babylon. The Seleucids govern through a network of military colonies where Macedonian and Greek veterans receive land grants, marry local women, and raise children who speak Koine Greek at the gymnasium and Aramaic in the marketplace. This is the engine of Hellenistic fusion, not imposed from above by royal decree alone, but grown organically in thousands of daily transactions between cultures. At the eastern edge of this world, in the valleys of what is now northern Afghanistan, the city of Ai-Khanum stands as proof of how far Greek culture travels. A theatre seats 6,000. A gymnasium trains young men in wrestling and philosophy. A temple blends Corinthian columns with Central Asian proportions. Inscriptions reproduce Delphic maxims in Greek letters carved into stone thousands of miles from Delphi itself. The Greco-Bactrian kingdom that emerges here around 250 before the Common Era mints some of the finest silver coinage in the ancient world. Portraits of kings rendered with a realism that surpasses anything produced in the Greek homeland. New gods arise to serve new populations. In Egypt, the cult of Serapis merges Osiris and Apis with attributes of Zeus and Hades, creating a deity acceptable to both Greek settlers and Egyptian worshippers. Temples to Serapis spread across the eastern Mediterranean, their rituals conducted in Greek, their iconography blending pharaonic and Olympian traditions. But the Hellenistic world carries within it the seeds of fragmentation. The Seleucid Empire begins losing its eastern provinces after 190 before the Common Era, when defeat by Rome at Magnesia strips it of Anatolia. Parthian horsemen reclaim Iran. In 168 before the Common Era, Rome crushes the last Antigonid king at Pydna, and Macedonia becomes a Roman province. One by one, the successor kingdoms fall, Pergamon bequeathed to Rome by testament, the Seleucid rump state absorbed, until only Ptolemaic Egypt remains. Cleopatra VII, last of the Ptolemaic line, stakes her dynasty's survival on Roman civil wars. She loses. In 30 before the Common Era, Octavian's legions enter Alexandria. The queen dies by her own hand. Egypt becomes a Roman province. The political structures Alexander's generals built have perished, but the Greek language, the Greek city, the Greek intellectual tradition, these survive inside the Roman world, invisible architecture supporting a civilization that will call itself Latin, but think in patterns first established in the Hellenistic age. The political body dies, but the ghost walks on. Within a generation of Cleopatra's death, Roman generals and emperors begin measuring themselves against the Macedonian king, whose conquests they have inherited. Julius Caesar, standing before a statue of Alexander in a temple at Gades in southern Spain, reportedly weeps, not from admiration, but from the sting of comparison, aware that at the same age Alexander had already conquered the known world. Augustus keeps a signet ring carved with Alexander's likeness. Trajan, reaching the Persian Gulf in 116 of the Common Era, gazes across the water and declares he would cross it too, if only he were younger, an echo of the same restless hunger that drove Alexander past the Hydaspes. The marble workshops of Rome produce copy after copy of Lysippus's original bronze portraits: the tilted head, the lion mane hair, the upward gaze. These images multiply across the empire, decorating villas, bathhouses, military standards. Alexander becomes not merely a historical figure, but a template, the archetype of the world conqueror against whom all subsequent ambition is measured. When Islam rises in the 7th century, Alexander enters a new tradition. The Quran speaks of Dhul-Qarnayn, the two-horned one, a righteous king who travels to the edges of the earth and builds a wall against the forces of chaos. Muslim scholars identify him with Alexander, weaving Quranic narrative together with Persian and Greek sources. In the courts of Baghdad, Cairo, and later Istanbul, Alexander becomes Iskandar, a seeker of wisdom, a builder of wonders, a king blessed by divine purpose. Persian poets, above all Ferdowsi in the Shahnameh and Nizami in the Iskandarnameh, transform him into a philosopher king whose conquests serve spiritual illumination. His legend travels the Silk Road into Central Asian manuscript traditions, into Ethiopian Christian texts, into the folklore of peoples from Ireland to Indonesia. The vehicle for this global spread is the Alexander Romance, a literary tradition originating in Ptolemaic Alexandria around the 3rd century of the Common Era, falsely attributed to Callisthenes. Translated into Latin, Syriac, Armenian, Arabic, Ethiopic, and dozens of medieval European vernaculars, it becomes one of the most widely read texts of the pre-modern world. Its Alexander flies through the sky in a basket carried by griffins, descends to the ocean floor in a glass bell, converses with naked philosophers, and confronts his own mortality. Historical accuracy dissolves, but cultural power intensifies. Alexander becomes a mirror in which each civilization sees its own ideals reflected. The archaeological recovery of the historical Alexander begins in the modern era. In 1977, the Greek archaeologist Manolis Andronikos excavates the great tumulus at Vagina in northern Greece and discovers unlooted royal tombs beneath the earth. Inside one chamber lies a gold larnax bearing the 16-pointed star of the Argead dynasty, containing cremated bones. A gold wreath of oak leaves, an iron cuirass, ivory portrait heads barely 3 centimeters tall, one depicting a bearded man with a damaged right eye, almost certainly Philip II. The paintings on the tomb facade show a royal hunt in vivid color, the finest surviving examples of ancient Greek painting. These discoveries, granted UNESCO World Heritage status, restore material reality to a dynasty that had become pure legend. Today, Alexander's legacy persists in forms both visible and invisible. The grid-plan cities he founded, from Alexandria in Egypt, still home to millions, to Kandahar in Afghanistan, whose very name derives from Iskandar, remain inhabited. The Greek alphabet, carried eastward by Hellenistic settlers, became the ancestor of Coptic, Cyrillic, and through Roman adaptation, the Latin script now reading these words. The philosophical traditions of Aristotle, transmitted through Arabic translation in Hellenistic-founded cities like Antioch and Alexandria, shaped both Islamic and European intellectual life. The very idea that a single political vision might unite diverse peoples under shared institutions, an idea Alexander embodied, however imperfectly, echoes through every subsequent imperial project and every modern debate about cosmopolitanism and cultural exchange. The young king who burned Persepolis and wept at the Hephaestus remains, 23 centuries after his death, an unresolved question. Conqueror and visionary, destroyer and creator, a mortal who reached for divinity and left behind a world permanently altered by the attempt. Thank you for joining this journey through the rise and legacy of Alexander and the world he made. If this story moved you, consider subscribing so you never miss what comes next.